hostages weren't famous, just Egyptian Christians who'd been looking for migrant work in Libya. They're famous now, butchered as part of the ISIS plan to enslave, convert, or exterminate opposing faiths.
And today, we're on the south of Rome, on the land of Islam, Libya, sending another message.
And something else was murdered 21 times on that terrible day on the beach.
But there are members of your own party who believe that the president is missing a big part of the picture here by not identifying ISIS as Islamic extremist. Congresswoman Tulsi Gabbard, Democrat from Hawaii, she is a veteran of the Iraq War, said this to us the other day about strategy.
Unless you accurately identify who your enemy is, then you can't come up with an effective strategy, a winning strategy to defeat that enemy.
So you might not call them Islamic extremists because you don't want to give them, as you said, the dignity of being part of the Islamic faith. But if you don't identify them as a radical terrorist religious ideology, can you adequately address the threat and develop a winning strategy?
Look, ISIL is what it is. It is a terrorist organization that kills Americans.
But they want to become a state.
They want to become a state, and they want to become an Islamic state. And to call them Islamic, to call them any form of Islamic, gives them too much dignity, in my view, and in the view of a lot of Muslims around the world.
The president has, on occasion, Mr. Secretary, seemed to draw a moral equivalence between what ISIS is doing in the 21st century and what Christians did 1,000 years ago when they were fighting Muslim armies. What's the relevance of making that comparison?
Well, look, again, from my Homeland Security perspective, we've got to deal with this terrorist organization, which is the most prominent on the world stage right now, which is one of the reasons, frankly, why the Department of Homeland Security will appeal. This is what appellate courts are for. We will seek a stay of Judge Hayden's injunction. Looking at it from my common sense perspective, the judge, in his opinion, and I read all 123 pages of it, said he has no quarrel with the notion that we are allowed to prioritize how we use our resources to deport people in this country. And we are prioritizing. We're prioritizing on convicted criminals. We are prioritizing on building border security, deporting those who are recent arrivals who are apprehended at the border. But there's a large segment of the undocumented population in this country who've been here for years, who are not going to be deported in any administration, Democratic or Republican. That's the reality.
But why not
and
let
so,
Congress
hold on. So from my Homeland Security law enforcement perspective, it is better to find ways to encourage that group of people to come forward, come out of the shadows, get on the books, be accountable, receive a work authorization, and pay taxes. And what the judge's opinion does is it says you can prioritize, and I don't quarrel with your leaving these people alone because they're not priorities, they're not criminals, and they've been here for years, but effectively I can't bring them out of the shadows. They have to stay in the shadows. And from the law enforcement perspective, from the perspective of the sheriff, the chief, the commissioner in cities and counties around the country, that's not a good thing. And so we are going to appeal, and we're going to seek a stay of this, and we welcome the debate in Congress about immigration reform. Unfortunately, we haven't been able to have it.
Give me an assessment of this threat. I mean, is this something that is one of those things that we've got a whole bunch of security, extra security at the mall today? This is something we got to worry about all week. Is this something, I mean, can you give us a little more detail?
Well, we've seen this a number of times now where a group will call for an attack on a country, on a specific location. And so we've got to be vigilant. So we ramp up security. There was a call for an attack on locations in Canada and Europe, and so in response to that, I ramped up the presence of the Federal Protective Service at federal buildings a couple of months ago. I'm sure that security at this particular mall will be enhanced in ways visible and not visible, but it also involves public vigilance and public awareness. If you see something, say something, has to be more than a slogan.
But at this point, you're not telling people not to go to the mall.
I'm not telling people to not go to the mall. I think that there needs to be an awareness, there needs to be vigilance, and be careful. Obviously, it's a new phase. We're in a new phase right now, and that involves public participation in our efforts.
Obviously, this whole point of this extremist summit was about, because there is concern. You have these communities, the Twin Cities, the Somali community with a large Muslim population, Dearborn, other communities in the U.S. I do not believe, and I know this is a horrible thing to say, but I do not believe that the president loves America. He wasn't brought up the way you were brought up, and I was brought up through love of this country. Over the next 48 hours, Gulijani attempted to explain himself and either doubled down or dug deeper, depending upon your point of view.
Mr. Mayor, do you want to apologize for your comment?
Not at all. I want to repeat it. The reality is, from all that I can see of this president, all that I've heard of him, he apologizes for America. He criticizes America.
Gulijani defended his comments to the New York Times, saying, quote, "Some people thought it was racist. I thought that was a joke. Since he was brought up by a white mother, a white grandfather, went to white schools, and most of this he learned from white people. This isn't racism. This is socialism, or possibly anti-colonialism." Gulijani even used an old racial dog whistle of the civil rights era, communism.
His grandfather introduced him to Frank Marshall Davis, who was a communist.
Democrats seem to enjoy watching the spectacle. Did Rudy Giuliani prove that he wasn't being polite to the 40?
Well, look, we got 60% of the vote twice in my lifetime, and we ought to run our party where we can still get 60% of the vote. I wouldn't characterize my views of President Obama the way Mayor Giuliani did. I think the problem with Barack Obama is his policy. Bad policy that has produced bad results, and that's what we ought to want to talk about. The Democrats are loving not having to talk about that. They would rather talk about Rudy Giuliani till the cows come home.
Should we care what Rudy Giuliani thinks right now? No, I mean, no, he's not in office. He's not running for anything. Should it even matter?
Well, he's like me. His political future's behind him. And look, to make this such a big deal is partially being fed by people that want to change the subject. I thought a couple of Republican candidates for president made the point. You had Marco Rubio on the screen there a minute ago. He said this is all about policy. Jeb Bush said we ought to be talking about policy. If I'm going to criticize the president, it's going to be on his policies and the bad results that produce those policies. I agree with that. That's how you run your party, so that 60% of the people will be willing to consider voting for a Republican.
I know a lot of Republicans ask you advice sort of how to handle this day and age, and we've seen, it seems that Wisconsin Governor Scott Walker is learning what it's like to be considered a front runner. And he was asked over the weekend, he's been in town for the National Governors Conference, and he was asked about the president's religion. And we can debate whether that was an appropriate question or not. But here's how he responded about whether the president's a Christian. He said, I've actually never talked about it, or I haven't read about that. I've never asked him that. You've asked me to make statements about people that I haven't had a conversation with about. How could I say if I know either of you are a Christian, referring to the two reporters in the Washington Post? I guess, what's your advice to him, though? It seems that he left it open. It was sort of you can call it a gotcha question, but he chose to answer it and he left it open. Was that a mistake?
Well, look. Scott Walker's had a great record as governor of Wisconsin. He's won 3 times in 4 years in a tough state. He shares with Chris Christie the fact that he's won in a state that's hard for Republicans to win in, but he shouldn't take the bait on this kind of stuff. I don't think it's any kind of glaring problem. I think the Post is trying to make a lot more out of it. There's a lot less here than meets the eye.
Well, they did respond. I should full disclosure here that.
I mean, the way this is rolled just says so much about this presidency. If you look back at other previous authorizations of force, the 2 that President Bush sent to Congress, the one George H.W. sent when he was going into Iraq, the way that happened is the president had a strategy. He knew exactly what he wanted Congress to authorize. He sent it to him and he said, here's what I need from you to get her done, up or down vote, yes or no. This president has sent a document to Congress that's like, well, here's my first thoughts. Why don't you guys take a look at it? Let me know, get back to me. And the problem is that what he's trying to do, this is political cover. He wants the Congress to basically agree to codify his ambivalence about fighting ISIS. And that's why the authorization of force has so many problems.
Do you agree, Kirsten, that he's looking for...
War by killing them. We cannot kill our way out of this war. We need, in the longer term, medium and longer term, to go after the root causes that leads people to join these groups, whether it's lack of opportunity for jobs.
It's a little insulting to people who are jobless or poor to suggest that is the cause of terrorism. The overwhelming majority of the people who are poor or jobless are not terrorists. They don't strap bombs on their children or their women and send them into a shopping center to kill innocent men, women.